Hello, welcome to the Wildline Podcast. I'm your host, Dan. This is a podcast about movies and how much money they make at the box office. Today, we're going to do our normal weekend review. It is for the weekend of March 16th through today, March 18th. Not too many surprises here. Of course, Black Panther is in number one again. Came in at $27 million is the current estimate for the weekend. A fantastic 33% drop, which is, I believe, even lower than last weekend. And that's sort of the thing that we want to keep an eye on with Black Panther in terms of its amazing performance are these drops. If it keeps drops below the 50%, 45% range, it has a chance to really break some all-time records. It already has broken a lot of records. It currently sits at $605 million overall, which, you know, the last few weeks, I've talked a lot about Black Panther and its performance and why it happened and why it's doing so well and how it's doing so well. And, you know, it's really hard to wrap my head around this performance. You know, in its fifth weekend now, it sits at over $600 million. You know, it's getting closer and closer to the Avengers, Last Jedi, which, you know, just in that sentence, the Black Panther is going to beat The Last Jedi, the last Star Wars movie. Just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense on any level. But it is happening. And it is a story that I think everybody in the box office world, in the entertainment movie world, is really fascinated by. Deadline did a really cool takedown, a sort of analysis of how they think Black Panther will do in terms of profit for Disney. They're thinking that, and this is according to like their financial sources inside the industry, that Black Panther could end up making about $460 million in pure profit, right? You're looking at probably about $650 million domestically for its final run. And then internationally, about 1.25 billion is what they're sort of tracking right now for the Black Panther's performance. So they see that as about a $460 million profit for Disney, which I guess, you know, if you didn't know a lot about how profits work in the movie industry, you'd say like that's a lot of money. It does make sense based on this performance. Like internationally, it's not as doing as well as, say, the Avengers or a Jurassic World or even a Star Wars. Those are international global films. Black Panther is doing pretty well overseas besides China. I'm not really sure what's going on in China, but it's not doing great over there. But everywhere else, it's doing fantastic. And with these 33% drops coming in, and it's $600 million domestically now, you know, the profit for Disney is going to be outlandish. A $400 million profit is much higher than even something like a Civil War, or most MCU films don't really get close to the $400 million profit range. So that's just something to sort of throw out there and think about. And so, you know, the big picture thought here is that, like, because Black Panther is doing so well at the box office wise, that will play downstream. If you're really interested, do check out the Deadline article because it walks through each revenue stream for Black Panther in terms of like DVD sales, which still exist, VOD rentals, which will happen in a couple of months, and then of course streaming rights and TV rights, which can be really lucrative for a movie like this. You know, I'm not sure what they're going to do with Black Panther. I guess because the Disney streaming service won't be out yet. I think it's coming out in 2019. Normally, I think moving forward, something like a Black Panther or Thor Ragnarok would premiere streaming-wise, subscription streaming service, SVOD for you industry nerds. Those sort of premieres are going to shift over to the Disney streaming service instead of like a Netflix or an Amazon Prime or an HBO. So that'll be fascinating when that transition happens, because that brings up a whole nother issue of how do you value a movie? Because right now Black Panther is, say, worth $20 million to a streaming service that they have to pay to stream it for like a year, maybe. These are ballpark figures. Moving over to when Disney has their own streaming service, Disney's not going to get paid $20 million anymore. Right? They're going to have to use that movie to build their own subscription base. Very different business model. Not to get nerdy, but very different sort of risk mitigation that you have to go through with a product. That's one of the more fascinating things that's happening in the movie industry now is how do you value a film, especially after its box office run. And there's a whole nother sort of complicated series of analysis that you do before a movie comes out, but after it comes out, there's a whole nother can of worms that gets opened up in terms of how much it's actually worth and how much you can get paid for licensing it out to a company. In any event, Black Panther is doing fantastic. Its drop is wonderful. A 33% drop in its fifth weekend is, I'll continue to use the term, outrageous. It is completely abnormal. There's no real way to quantify it, or at least with words. It's just sort of like, what the hell is happening? It lost about 100 theaters. I think that's mostly IMAX and maybe 3D theaters at Tomb Raider. That's probably my guess. Per theater average is $7,000 per theater this weekend. And again, total gross just over $600 million. So we talked a little bit about, Black Panther and the profits of it, and how that is obviously going to make Disney very happy. But when you think about the longer term consequences of a profit of, say, almost $500 million from a single property like this, obviously that's going to change the path for MCU. Maybe not completely, but we'll see how Infinity does here, and the second one comes out next year. But it's going to shift MCU in a different direction. And I kind of, the takeaways from Black Panther and how it's doing so well and why it's doing so well, you could say it's an auteur director, right? It wasn't sort of a yes man that they brought in to direct the film. It was somebody with a creative vision who was also confident about doing something unique. So I feel like MCU is going to take a little bit more chances. I should say Disney, but I like to say Marvel, whatever, are going to take some more chances with younger directors who may not be that experienced in the blockbuster world, but they're going to give them a chance to create a really unique world for MCU, because it's worked really well with Thor, the third Thor Ragnarok, and it's worked very well with Black Panther. Which kind of reminds me of Ant-Man, and how Ant-Man could have been maybe done a lot better if they had let Edgar Wright do his own vision instead of bringing in a yes man, which is essentially what they did for that movie after Edgar Wright left, because that was like a precursor to all of this movement in MCU towards more vibrant colors, more sort of creative experimentation, I would say, on some level. They're not cookie cutter movies. There's a lot going on in them, and they're really dynamic, and there's a lot of layers to them. Now they're not high art like Oscar films, but they're definitely a step or two above your traditional blockbusters, which is why I think they're doing so well. It's a combination of all the popcorn blockbuster sort of mechanics, like they're getting those right, the explosions, the action, the pacing, the excitement, but also I think on the artistic side, just the cinematography, the acting, and the overall vibe of the film. It's very interesting and deep and rich, and I think that's a combination of those two things, which is the reason why Black Panther is doing so well, and I think why MCU is the most successful cinematic universe, and Marvel is the most successful movie studio right now, and they're by a country mile. They are more successful than the other studios out there. So I think that's why it's a unique combination of these different elements. They understand how to make a blockbuster film interesting and deep and engaging, and I think that's one of the reasons why Black Panther has done so well. Okay, so Black Panther is going to make $500 million in profit. It sounds like. Is it going to beat Avengers? It looks like it's going to beat Avengers really easily now. I know I was a little bit reluctant on that last weekend, but just looking at the numbers now for Black Panther, Avengers shouldn't be a problem whatsoever. Let's see where it's at right now. It's a little bit ahead of Last Jedi. Last Jedi was at 592 versus Black Panther 605 right now. So it's ahead of Last Jedi, so it's definitely going to eclipse that. It's way ahead of the Avengers at this point. The Avengers at this point was only at 552 versus Black Panther 605. And it's also ahead of Jurassic World. Jurassic World had going for it. It came out in summer, and I think it played really well I think it was like June, wasn't it, when it came out? And it played really well June, July, and August. So it had 3 full months of the summer vacation to really do well. So that's why it tended to last a lot longer in theaters than other blockbuster films. So Black Panther's ahead of all of those. The other one there, Box Office Mojo is comparing it to is The Force Awakens. And of course, The Force Awakens felt like a once in a generation film. At this point, Force Awakens was at $852 million versus $605 for Black Panther. So that's obviously not in range. But it is ahead of those other big films. And my guess right now, Deadline is projecting 650 as the ending run. I think it goes a little bit higher. I think it beats Jurassic World at 652, and I think it hits 660, maybe even 665, 670, somewhere in that range. I think it's definitely going to break the 650 mark, just because there's not a ton coming out over the next month. Ready Player One, I think, is the next big, huge blockbuster. And that doesn't come out to, I think, 2 weeks from this Wednesday. So it's got a clear runway for a while. And I think that, I was kind of skeptical on my thought process with Avengers Infinity was that, okay, Black Panther did so well and overachieved so much, doubled its highest projections, right? You got to remember, that's one thing I also want to talk about is tracking. I had the thought process about a week ago, 2 weeks ago, that Infinity is going to come out. It's only a month and a half away. Black Panther must be depressing the opening numbers for that. But then there's articles this week where Infinity is breaking Black Panther's pre-sale records, or broke the Batman versus Superman record in 6 hours or something like that. So Infinity might be even bigger than Black Panther. I don't know. I thought it was going to go below it for some reason. It's because I think, my perception of why people go to the movies or what drives them is that they do have limited cash, right? Everybody has limited money, and people only go about 4 to 5 times a year in the US and Canada. So I'm thinking, Black Panther was their big movie this spring. Maybe they're going to skip Infinity and wait for it until it's on DVD or VOD or whatever. I don't know if that's going to happen. I think Black Panther is just adding to the hype, which is an argument I didn't buy 2-3 weeks ago, but now I'm starting to buy it with these pre-sales numbers coming in for Infinity. And so that's sort of the big picture of Black Panther, obviously doing amazing. Some little different facets. Its profit, $450 million in profit, around that, almost basically $500 million. The one thing that I was thinking a little bit about this week, because no one's been able to really figure out why Black Panther has done so well. And I think one of the bigger issues going into Black Panther, fantastic opening weekend of over $200 million, was that tracking was at 100 to 120. And, I think that signals to me that something is really off internally in the industry with how they are valuing films and predicting the business of a film. Because if you're off $100 million in an opening weekend like that, the tracking system is completely broken. Now, maybe it's not broken for most films, but for a film like that, it was so far off, it's completely useless. 3 weeks out, it should have been tracking at about 180, 170. And then as the hype got bigger and bigger, as we got closer, you would up that each week to somewhere around the $200 million mark where it hit. That would be what a normal business and industry would do, is be like, well, we got this totally wrong. How can we fix this in the future? I don't think they're really fixing it. I think the fact that Black Panther was tracking at $100 million is because they haven't changed the tracking system that much over the last 5-10 years. And so I think that's one thing with the box office and the movie industry in general that they really have to wrap their head around. And I think Black Panther is sort of the canary in the coal mine for tracking and assessing hype and social media hype. I don't think they have it together at all right now. I don't think the industry really understands social media and how it works. They completely missed what happened with Black Panther. And the arguments that they're throwing out are just complete honest bullshit. They're saying, African-American audiences were 40% opening weekend. That's really abnormal. They're using this is not a normal movie card. But any good business person will tell you the outliers are sometimes the most important movies. And you have to be able to build a model for assessing the value of a film with those outliers involved, right? And I think Black Panther is not only going to change a lot in terms of creatively where MCU and Marvel is going with their cinematic universe, but I also think it's going to change a lot in the industry in terms of tracking and how people value films and predict films. Because you got to remember, it sounds like kind of nerdy, like, oh, what does it matter if tracking's off $100 million? If tracking's off $100 million, work that all the way back to the moment the movie is signed into development, like 3 years ago, right? Probably more for Black Panther. So if they're trying to assess the value of a film, how much do you give to the production budget? How much do you give to marketing? What kind of actors do you sign on? What kind of directors? All of those things have to take into account how well it's going to do at the box office and the downstream sort of revenue streams that come in, like DVD and stuff like that. And so if you can't figure out within $100 million what it's going to do at the box office, then you're going to make horrendous decisions when the movie is put in development. And I think that's one of the big question marks here, is that, like, if tracking's that off, how off is it when they signed the movie into production 3 years ago and they put an $80 million production budget on something? Like, it's almost like at this point it kind of seems a little bit random what they're doing, because if you can't back up an $80 million or $200 million production budget with a sort of risk mitigated sort of outcome, what it's going to do at the box office, then that's like terrible business, and it's going to lead to a lot of failures, and that will lead to a lot of studios closing down. And I think, studios like Sony and Paramount are in real trouble spots because they have not been able to do that. They have not been able to predict what their movies are worth in the marketplace and to consumers. In any event, that's really wonky and nerdy. That's enough for that for now. I just wanted to sort of mention that about Black Panther, because that's something I was been thinking about this week. Is like, if tracking is off that much, like, aren't the entire financial models for movie making just wrong at this point, or just like kind of, I don't need to be updated or changed? That's what it seems like to me, but I'm of course an outside amateur, so what do I know? Okay, so number 2 this weekend was a wide release opener. It was Tomb Raider, 23.5 million, right on the lower end of tracking on that one. In about 3,854 theaters, exactly 3,854 theaters, I should say. Per theater average was $6,100. Budget on this one was pretty high, $94 million for Tomb Raider, which is really high considering the fact that this movie was based on the rebooted series of the video game. Remember, the video game came out whenever, late 90s. The movies were out in the early 2000s. They did okay. The second one really dropped off. I think it did 41% or something like that, less than below the first one. And so it's been a long time since we've had a Tomb Raider movie. It's one of those series that felt like it was supposed to be the female Indiana Jones. And it just didn't. It was it's too kitschy. And I think Angelina Jolie was too sexualized. It's a really sexist character when you think about it, at least the older one. This newer one added a lot of emotional depth to the character. And I think the new movie looks good. It looks pretty decent. The problem that I had with it, and this is a bigger problem, I think, with video games, movies in general, and this is becoming much more true than it used to be. First of all, video game movies have always had this stigma attached to them. They've always underperformed. If you look at the biggest video game movies of all time, obviously the first Tomb Raider is still the biggest one, which came out in 2001. Ended up at $131 million. That's not adjusted. Let me adjust this. I feel like I want to adjust this because these are older movies. Let's adjust it to 2018. So that would have been $212 in today's dollars, which is a pretty good performance. The second one would be Pokemon. It's like I'm 80 years old. Came out in 99. Notice these films. These are not recent films. Mortal Kombat came out in 1995. I saw that opening weekend. It came out on my birthday. I was 13. $148 million adjusted gross overall. The more recent one, Angry Birds, came out in 2016, did 113. Prince of Persia did 105. Only one over 200 million, and only a couple in the 150 range. Most of them, even if they're successful, are struggling to get to the $100 million mark. So it is a genre of film that has always underperformed expectation. I think a lot of people within the industry, when video games became super popular in the 1980s and through the 90s, and now they're just like a really integral part of our culture. When they first got started, the studios felt like there's this massive sort of payday for any video game adaptation into a film. Like this felt like it was like a huge, massive opportunity to make some real big cash. And it just did not play out that way. And they've never really connected with people. And there's always the argument that like, yeah, games are really interactive. You play them. Going to movies is extremely passive. You sit there and sort of watch the image. You're not really engaged that much. That's one of the bigger arguments against them. Rampage will also test that out. Although Rampage is different because Rampage was a big video game like in the early 1980s. So like people like me remember Rampage and have played it before, but like anybody who was born after 1990 probably hasn't, would be my guess. So it'll be a lot different because that's a brand new property for a lot of younger people. There's also the Minecraft movie coming out next year, which is going to be a disaster. I think we all know that. So Tomb Raider already had that going against it. Video games in general just have not played that well at the box office. Another issue I think specifically related to this version of Tomb Raider is if you have played the last two Tomb Raider games, they are fantastic. They are very, very good video games, but they're very cinematic too. So when you're playing the rebooted Tomb Raider, it feels like you're playing a movie. It really does. And so when I saw the trailer for this Tomb Raider, I was like, oh, I recognize almost all of these scenes from the video game. And I've played it before and I've already seen it. So why would I go spend $10, $15, $20 to go see Tomb Raider, the movie, when I've already played the video game? So I think that was a big problem here. If they had made it totally different than the recent video games, I could see it doing a little bit better. But I just... if you think about it in terms of like how I like to break down why a movie does good or bad, between marketing and product. I sound such like a MBA student right now. Marketing wise, I think it did okay. Not a grand slam, but kind of a double, adequate for a movie like this. I think the biggest problem here is not even the product quality. I know Rotten Tomatoes gave it like a 49. Audience score was a 70. Cinema score was a B, so not great, very middling performance. I think ultimately the issue here is product conception. Like, why are you spending $94 million on a new Tomb Raider movie? I know the new video games did very well. They sold massive numbers over the last few years, but just leave it at that. It's essentially like playing a movie when you're playing Tomb Raider, so it's like, why would I want to, who wants to go see that again? So, I don't know. It just seemed like from the start, this thing was kind of doomed. And I think most of box office nerds felt like it was going to underperform. Is $23 million opening weekend underperformance? It is. I mean, it really is. Versus that $94 million budget and a pretty hefty marketing budget as well. Yeah, it's not necessarily flop, but it's definitely in the underperformance realm. We'll see how it does longer term. I just don't, who's going to go see this? What's the multiplier going to be? Below 3x, I would say, maybe 2.5x. Would that put that at 2.5x? I wish I was better at mental math. $57 million, about $60 million is probably what's going to end up at. So not great. Maybe it can be saved by international. I kind of want to see what it's doing international. Right now, it's made $102 million international so far. I wonder how many places it's opened up at. Let me see. Okay. So it actually may not do horrific because it's going to play well over in Asia, it looks like. Numbers are in from Hong Kong, Indonesia, South Korea, Taiwan. They look pretty strong to me. So maybe it's saved by its international performance, and maybe that was the plan all along. Maybe the United States wasn't really a super big focus for that film. In any event, it did come in at number 2 at $23.5 million for the weekend. Number 3 this weekend was, I guess it's a Christian family film. I Can Only Imagine came in at $17 million. Really overperformed. Massive overperformance here. Theater count was only 1,600. hardly a wide release. Per theater average was $10,500 for the weekend, on a budget of $7 million, production budget, of course. I didn't know anything about this film. It kind of blindsided a lot of people, I think. Only open at 1,600 theaters. You're thinking it's gonna do sub 10. Like, you're probably thinking at best it's gonna do 7, 8 million, 9 million bucks. The fact that it did double that almost is really kind of cool to see. It's from Roadside Attractions. They put out a lot of different movies, a lot more art films than anything. They put out Manchester by the Sea, Beatrice at Dinner, Lady Macbeth. I didn't see that one. They put out Wonderstruck. They have not had a real big hit recently. This is their biggest hit probably since Manchester by the Sea, in by a long shot. I mean, everything else is pretty in like the single digits or even below that. So a big hit for them. I don't know that much about this film besides the fact that Dennis Quaid is in it, and Dennis Quaid is in like every new Christian movie now because he's super religious. But a really big win here, and I think it's going to play well for the next 2 weeks all the way through Easter. Good Easter film, I think, for families to see. So that's cool. Really surprising performance by I Can Only Imagine. Number 4 was A Wrinkle in Time. Dropped 50%. That's really high for a movie like this. 16.5 million on the weekend. Still the most widely released film right now on almost 4,000 theaters. Per theater average is 4,162. Total take so far for A Wrinkle in Time is $61 million. This is not a good performance. I guarantee you the budget was massive. This is a product quality issue. I think it had all the marketing stuff going for it. It had Oprah going for it, who can get like 1 million people to do anything if she tweets it. Just not a really good performance at all. And I think ultimately it just was not well put together. Although the director just got greenlit for some massive movie. I gotta look that up real quick because I was really surprised, because usually what happens is in a situation like this where you have a massive big film that's supposed to do well and it doesn't do well, usually the director is put on ice for a bit, right? They're just sort of like, it's not like they're like abandoned or like put into a corner. They just sort of like, they don't want to, like, no one wants to bring them on for a new project. And she just got signed up for the new DC massive movie. What is it called? DC Gods, I think it's called. So New Gods or something. I don't know. It's some huge movie for DC. Really interesting move right there, because I don't want to say she failed, but at this level, she did not perform all that well. It'd be like this, the same thing. I always go back to sports analogies just because that's what I grew up with. If you know anything about baseball, if you can't hit a fastball in single A baseball, you're not going to get moved up to the majors and be a batter, right? Like, that's not going to happen. And so I think with her, she did really great with Selma. This was like her big audition in the Major League Baseball, right? And she kind of didn't struck out, but she just didn't hit very well. She had like a sub 200 average. So it's a little bit surprising to me that she's being brought into the DC world. If I was a DC EU person, I would be a little bit nervous, just because they have a very bad track record with picking the right people. She's obviously very talented and can make some awesome movies, but maybe that the bigger movies like this one, Wrinkle in Time, was pretty much kind of a struggle for her. I don't even know what the Rotten Tomatoes score was. Wrinkle in Time, it was super low, 40% on Rotten Tomatoes, and audiences were vicious against it too. 34% audience score, but I think that's honestly a lot of racists were kind of trying to bring the movie down. So not a great performance for Wrinkle in Time. I thought it would hurt her career a little bit, but it sounds like she's getting moved up even to a bigger level with a huge production budget. So we'll see how that plays out. That movie probably won't come out for 3 to 4 years. So Wrinkle in Time was number 4. Number 5 was Love, Simon from Fox, 11.5 million in about 2,400 theaters. Per theater average was just shy of $4,800. Production budget on this one was lower in the $17 million range. This one I think is an overperformance. I believe it is kind of a young adults gay love story, I think, is what I can gather. Had not seen the trailer for it. So overperformance. This was not expected, I think, to break into double digits. And the thing about a performance like this, from a film like this, is that like this will help catapult it sort of towards the next level. It's weird how opening weekends can be exponential in terms of their importance to a film, which is why I think I'm so fascinated by it. If a movie like this breaks in the double digits, so many more people are going to hear about it, and it's going to have this word of mouth effect, and it's going to have this viral effect to it where it's not going to become a massive, huge movie, I don't think. But now I can see it really having low drops and sticking around for a while, at least the next month or so. And so it goes from, just to give you an example, let's say it opened at like $6 million and it has a decent multiplier of 3. You're talking just around $20 million total box office take. Now that it's hit the 11 point double digit numbers and it's in the top 5 of the box office, at least a 3x, probably higher because of the nature of the film. I'm saying like a 3.3x. You're talking like almost $38 million for this. That's a huge difference, right? Almost doubling the box office performance for this. I think that's what's going to happen here. We'll see. I'll keep an eye on this one. I think it's going to play well and have really low drops over the next few weeks. But a really good performance for Love, Simon. Number 6 this weekend at the box office was Game Night, another fantastic drop, which is a movie, which is what I've sort of suggested over the last few weekends. Because Game Night opened a little bit depressed in its opening weekend, but the quality was very high, I believe well over 80% on Rotten Tomatoes, really good audience scores. That's why it's having these low drops. 5.6 million for the weekend. Lost about 300, almost 400 theaters. Per theater average is approaching the Mendoza line at 2,000 per theater. Total take so far is $54 million for Game Night. Let's see what it's doing internationally. I'm going to try and add a little bit more international flavor to the show, I feel like. Just because it is super important in the industry. This one does not seem like it has a big international audience because with American comedies in general, because comedy is so cultural, and sort of nuanced, that they tend to not play that well internationally. Only $30 million internationally. So how do we read this performance? It's a rated R comedy. Jason Bateman sort of was going to direct it, but then decided he's going to star in it. I think he helped write it. Some big names in there. It's not a terrible performance. But it's not a breakout performance. It's kind of right in that middling. Middling's kind of a negative connotation, but it's more like sort of right in a baseball term. It's probably like a single. And I wonder how this is going to affect rated R comedies in general. Just because, like, it's obviously a topic I've talked a lot about in the podcast the last couple of years since I've been doing it. I'm really fascinated by the rated R comedy genre just because it went through this boom 15 years ago, and now it's really dropped off and tapered off, almost like rom-coms have. This is kind of it's a solid performance. I wonder if this is going to help get more rated R comedies greenlit. We'll see when Blockers comes out, I believe. Is that next weekend? We'll see. But okay performance for Game Night so far. Number 7, Peter Rabbit from Sony, 5.2 million. Fantastic 23% drop. Lost about 4 in theaters. Per theater average is about 1,900, but this one's going to keep those low drops because it's obviously a movie about a bunny. Bunnies are really popular around Easter time. It has a family feel to it, so it's going to play strong definitely through the next 2 weeks. It is over $100 million so far for Peter Rabbit, so that's a pretty good performance there. Number 8 was Strangers Pray at Night, the sequel to Strangers. 4.8 million, a decent drop for a horror movie in its second weekend, 54% drop, still in about 2,500 theaters. Per theater average is not anemic at its second weekend, just below 2,000 per theater. Total take so far for Strangers Pray at Night was 18.6 million. I don't think they can be upset about that at all. I can't imagine they spent more than 7 million, 10 million to make it. So I think a pretty good performance for a very sort of low tier, low budget horror film to break $20 million at the box office. Not bad. Number 9 was Red Sparrow, 4.4 million for the weekend, 47, almost 48% drop. Lost about 500 theaters. Per theater average is at $1,700. This is its third weekend. Wow, this really did underperform, didn't it? Total gross so far is $39 million. That is just not great. I went all a long spiel about Jennifer Lawrence's career. I don't want to do that again. But this just reiterates it's just not doing well. And she's deciding to take a break from movies. I think that makes sense. Maybe she should get into like writing and producing or something like that. I don't know, her as a star, she'll come back eventually. But like Red Sparrow is just like, it's one of like the last three movies in a row that just have not performed very well for her. It's an okay movie. I saw it. I thought it was decent. Really timely. I think I walked through this last time. Product conception was good. Product itself was okay. Marketing, I don't think, was very good at all for this, which is why I think one of the reasons it's underperforming. And Jennifer Lawrence, for whatever reason, just is not strong enough of a star right now to get people into the seats. I don't know if there's anybody who is that strong of a star these days, because it's not really that type of industry anymore. But she just wasn't able to do it with Red Sparrow. Number 10 with Death Wish. This thing is just disappearing. 49% drop. Per theater average was $1,200. Only did about 3.4 million for the weekend. Total take so far for Death Wish is only $29 million bucks. Almost 30. Production budget was 30, which is higher for Eli Roth and what he usually does. Not a great performance. Bruce Willis can't get people into the seats, just like Jennifer Lawrence can't. I don't know. There's not much to say about that one. I do feel like, if this came out earlier when it was supposed to, I think it would have done a lot better. This seems to me more like a Christmas season movie, like a December film. They waited because there was a big shooting. Well, there's always a big shooting in the United States. There's always like a mass shooting every day here. They waited, I think, pushed it out, and then it got released right after the Parkland shooting in Florida, which it was another mass shooting, but really changed the discussion here in the United States about gun control. It went from, nothing's ever going to be done, to these kids basically saying, no, we're not going to stop. We're going to make sure that we're safe. And I think that really, Death Wish just really played against the culture right now. And plus, it's probably not a very good movie. I mean, come on, it looked terrible. Okay, so that's Death Wish. That's the top 10, folks. That's it. Black Panther, obviously, really running away with it here. Tomb Raider, not a great performance at all. I Can Only Imagine overperformed. Love, Simon overperformed. Game Night holding in there. Peter Rabbit doing well. Strangers sequel doing pretty well. Red Sparrow and Death Wish kind of flopping here at the bottom of the top 10. Outside the top 10, Annihilation is not doing very well. It's now on Netflix everywhere else besides the US and Canada. I don't know what they were thinking with that. I can find an HD copy in 2 seconds now. Why would I go see it in the theater? Only made $29 million. Awful for that movie. Jumanji still made $1.6 million, and it's out on VOD and DVD. Figure that one out. Still a sub 40% drop from last weekend. Oh, the one thing to do, I should note with Jumanji, it did cross over into the $400 million territory domestically. What a milestone for that film. 7 Days in Tebe also opens, apparently open to sub 2,000 per theater, only in 800 theaters, 1.6 million for the weekend. Didn't even crack the top 10. What the hell were they thinking with that movie? What's strange about 7 Days is that, it's from Focus Features, which is a pretty big imprint. Who are they under? Universal, I think. It's PG-13 action thriller. The trailer I saw looked pretty good. Rosamund Pike is in it. It's not like it's a completely throwaway film. I kind of wonder what happened with this one. It almost seemed like it got thrown out. The director, Jose Padilla, also did RoboCop, which did pretty well. But I guess that was the last big movie. He also did Rio, I Love You, but that looks kind of like a specialty flick. He did Bus 174, which is a big movie 15 years ago. I don't know what happened here. Very strange. And I saw the preview and it looked like a bigger movie than it was being sort of released as. So something strange happened. I'll have to look into more on that one. Well, let's take a look at Rotten Tomato score. Ooh, 22% Rotten Tomatoes. 41% audience score if you want to take that one seriously. who knows what, I mean, it sounds like an absolute mess. Too bad. Okay, so that is the top 10 with a couple of highlights outside the top 10. Let's look at Death of Stalin really quick, because I know that one was doing really well its opening weekend. Death of Stalin was a limited release, did 45K per theater last weekend in New York, Los Angeles. This weekend they expanded to 32 theaters. Per theater average is more down-to-earth $18,000. That's why I don't get why people were so over the moon about that performance. It's like $45,000 per theater. Isn't that great if it's just New York and Los Angeles? Now, $100,000 per theater, yeah, you'll pique my interest. But 45, I was like, eh. And the movie, who's the movie going to play to? Who's the audience for Death of Stalin? Besides like political nerds like me and then like art house freaks who see everything that's independent. Like, there's no audience for that film. So I don't know. I don't know why people were freaking out about it. Anything else open up this weekend? Flower, no idea what that is. I guess that's mostly it. And a lot of the Oscar films are still playing out there. Call Me By Your Name is just trying to inch towards $18 million at the box office, but also that got released on VOD, so probably not gonna happen. Okay, so let's talk briefly about next weekend, just because it is a big weekend. We're getting to the Easter holiday. I'll just like run through what's opening up and sort of see what's happening with them. Okay, so Midnight Sun is opening from Open Road Films. Not a great film production distribution business. It says Patrick Schwarzenegger's in it. I thought it said Patrick Swayze. I was like, didn't he die 5 years ago? Rob Riggle's in it, Bella Thorne, some bigger names, but Open Road doesn't know what they're doing half the time, and I don't think it's going to do very well. It's supposedly opened more in 2,000 theaters, but after that other, I can only imagine, Christian family films doing so well, that's going to get buried, I feel like. Pacific Rim Uprising. Oh, what a mistake. I did not like Pacific Rim at all. Thought it was a complete mess. I don't know why they're doing a sequel. The first one did decently well. This one, I don't see how anybody, I just don't think it's going to do very well at all. 3,700 theaters. Maybe it's another international play, possibly. But we'll see how that one does. I don't think it's going to do all that fantastic. Paul, Apostle of Christ is coming out from Sony Columbia. There's your Easter Christian film. 1,400 theaters. I don't see that one doing very well either. I haven't heard anything about the quality of that. Basically, what's happening with the Christian films is they're all chasing the Passion of the Christ phenomenon, which happened, like 16 years ago? And I don't know if they've really ever created the magic that Mel Gibson did by showing Jesus get beaten for 2 hours straight. I can't believe I sat through that movie. It was so bad. And I grew up with all the Catholic stuff, so it was sort of like, what is this? But whatever, Christian people loved it and went to go see it multiple times. And so that's why we get movies like Paul, Apostle of Christ coming out this weekend, just trying to hope to cash in on that Christian audience. Sherlock Gnomes is also coming out. It's a really busy weekend. Sherlock Gnomes coming out, 3,500 theaters from Paramount. Paramount's been pretty much of a train wreck for the last 2 years. We'll see if Sherlock Gnomes does okay. It might. Because what else is there for kids besides Peter Rabbit? And that came out like a few weeks ago. I feel like Sherlock Gnomes can do okay. We'll see how it does. Really interesting coming out from Bleecker Street, which is a new upstart, kind of like A24, kind of like the New Kids on the Block doing really well. Unsane from Steven Soderbergh. Really strange movie. No marketing on it until this week. Right? They did not market the film until like last Friday. And this is like Soderbergh's way of like trying to prove that like you don't need to market it for like 6 months. I don't know. That didn't work so well for his last experiment. Whatever that was, came out August last year. Logan Lucky. That did not work. That marketing plan did not work out well for that movie. I don't think anybody's going to go see Unsane either because no one has any idea what it is. It just breaks every rule of marketing. You don't market something at the last second unless it has a built-in brand like a Cloverfield movie. Right? Like I have no recognition of what this is. And I'm a film nerd who follows this stuff. And I saw the trailer for this and I saw who was involved. I want to see it. I'm not going to go pay for it. No effing way. I want to see what it's all about because I like Steven Soderbergh and what he does. But I can't imagine what a normal person thinks about this. Like, what is this? It looks super low budget. I don't know. It's a mess. I do not think that's going to do well at all. I'm not even sure how many theaters are going to put in it. Maybe 1,500. Limited wise, Isle of Dogs is coming out from Wes Anderson, which I think has a chance of doing really well. It's animation, Fox Searchlight. It's going to open limited markets, probably San Francisco, Chicago, New York, LA, something like that. They're going to see how it plays there and slowly expand it out. I think it's going to be a grand slam in those cities. The real question is when it hits places like a San Antonio or a Dallas or like a Miami or Fort Lauderdale, like what does it do in those cities? If it does well there and it keeps expanding out and out and out, it could be a decent hit for Fox Searchlight and Wes Anderson. It looks really fascinating. I mean, Wes Anderson's probably one of my favorite directors of all time, easily. And so I'll always see what he does. But I'm interested in the commercial aspect of this one and how well it's going to do. So that opens limited this weekend, probably expands out. I'm not sure when. Doesn't list the expansion yet. They're probably going to wait and see how it does. And then you got Easter weekend, just a couple of films coming out. Tyler Perry's Acrimony from Lionsgate, and then another Christian film, God's Not Dead, A Light in the Darkness from Pure Flix, the ultimate Christian company. And then it's actually before that, Friday the 30th, we have the big movie coming out. Steven Spielberg's Ready Player One comes out Wednesday the 28th, I think. That's sort of the next big movie to watch. This weekend is very busy. I just don't see anything really breaking out that much. I think Sherlock Gnomes has a chance of doing a good long-term 3-month business. I don't think Pacific Uprising is going to do well. Nothing on the 30th looks like it's going to break out. Ready Player One, I think, is the next big tentpole film that we can watch. And then we're into April. And I could talk about this stuff forever. I got to cut myself off. April starts out pretty strong with Blockers is a big movie that I want to track and see how well that's going to do, because that's the rated R comedy world. And I can see that one doing okay and doing well, but we'll see. In any event, guys, thanks for listening. I will be back next week to talk about what happens at the weekend box office top 10. Thanks for listening. This has been the Wildline Podcast.